Morning glory, America. Bonjour. Hi, Canada. I'm Hugh Hewitt. You know, there are things that happen in the world of broadcast that you have no idea. And this morning has been all of that. Now, some of you may have heard, could have told by the quality of the voice that the microphone wasn't working this morning. And we got an emergency repair done between the top of the hour and now it is working. So hopefully Len Khodorkovsky is there, and hopefully you can hear me. Len, are you there?
I'm here.
There's my friend. Hey, you've got the same setup that you had when Don Lemon savaged you.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm forever known as the Trump Jew grilled by Don Lemon.
Let's do what Don should have done. Welcome, Len. It's good to have you. Can you tell us your background and your connection with former President Trump?
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate that. What my background is, I am a refugee from the Soviet Union. I came to the United States with my family in the early 80s during the Cold War. You know, this was way before Gorbachev and Perestroika. So, you know, it was still hard for Jewish refugees to get out of the Soviet Union. We got lucky because the new KGB chief in town liked my grandparents' apartment, so they threw us out. And we had 3 weeks to pack our stuff and get out. That's what we did. So I came to America because of the institutional anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. And I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled that my kids are American. And I think we won the lottery.
So when you arrived in the United States, could you speak any English, Len?
Zero. No English whatsoever.
So where did you go to elementary school? Because you have no accent and it sounds like you were born somewhere in New York.
Well, we arrived. We got to New Jersey and we settled in a very much kind of a blue collar working neighborhood. It wasn't just Russian immigrants, or it was just a mixed working neighborhood with, you know, my friends at the time who spoke a little better English than I did were, you know, Jamaican, Puerto Rican, you know, from all over the place. So I guess I had no choice but to learn English to get around the neighborhood.
All right, so you're a Russian Jew by ethnic and nationalist origin, but you're an American. You've been in the United States for, how old are you now, Len?
I'm 53.
And you've done a lot of television, a lot of radio. People love to follow your Twitter feed. What is it? Something from Len. What's the Twitter feed?
It's Message from Len.
And what did you do at Message from Len? What did you do in the Trump administration, and how did you end up in the Trump administration?
Well, I did what a lot of immigrants do, which is, you know, figure things out here in my new home country. And I went to school. I ended up in the advertising business in New York. I did pretty much your Mad Men type advertising for 20 or so years. And at some point, I ended up with a ad agency that had a guy named Donald Trump as a client. And
so, where did you first go into the Trump administration? At the Department of State or somewhere else?
No, I went straight to Department of State. I came in as the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Digital Strategy, and my goal was just to bring what I knew, what I learned from the private sector, to make our foreign policy communications the best for the world.
So, did you work for both Mike Pompeo and his predecessor, Rex Tillerson?
Correct. Yes. So I came.
And you were.
Yeah, I came in at the tail end of 2017, still under Tillerson, and then, essentially my job was to get Mike Pompeo's social media, digital accounts off the ground, make sure that his voice was accurately conveyed around the world.
No, I tell everyone, you're brilliant. You are a mastermind of digital strategy and communicating. Obviously, CNN called you up after the president's dinner with Kanye West and Nick Fuentes and Milo to get your reaction as a Russian Jew who worked for Trump to that dinner. So let me ask, before we talk about Don Lemon, what was your reaction to that dinner?
Well, as I told Don, I don't think any anti-Semite should be given a forum, especially by by a man of President Trump's stature. I thought it was beneath him to take the meeting. I do believe him when he says that he didn't know Nick Fuentes was going to be at the meeting. In fact, Nick Fuentes himself said that he didn't think that Trump had any idea who he was. So let's just take him at his word and take that. But I think Kanye West, Fuentes, people like that, and I would add, as I did with Don, people like Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, people like that into the same category, which is they make it easier to spread true hatred in the world. And frankly, that hits home. So I felt like I needed to be honest with Don to make sure that, the audience there made a distinction between the guy who happened to have those two characters at his dinner table and President Trump himself. And I know that CNN really tried to conflate the two and target Trump with the anti-Semitism brush, and I just thought it was unfair.
So when you set up the interview with CNN, did they tell you, because it was a disaster, it was a complete meltdown by Don. I've been on the receiving end of that before, where he gets spun up in wanting an answer and thinks it's a drama and needs a viral moment and wants to get ratings. What was the setup? Did they tell you that that's what it was going to be and you said yes, or were you surprised by Don Lemon's approach to you?
No, as you know, their producers call you the night before and kind of, talk about, your take on whatever it is that you want to talk about. So the producer was very nice and called me up and said, yeah, we're going to talk about Trump's dinner at Mar-a-Lago, and it's fine. I gave him my 2 cents about it. I asked him, is there any other topic that I should plan on covering? And he basically said, no, that's what we're going to talk about. So I knew I was walking into a topic that was hot. And, but what I expected was professionalism. I didn't get much of that.
Okay, that's the key thing. What would professionalism in that situation look like to Len Khodorkovsky, who's an advertising executive and a veteran of the State Department?
Well, the very basic part of that formula is allowing your guest to finish your answer. I spent about 10 minutes trying to finish a single thought because Don Lemon would just jump in and, impose his rules on what it is and what it is that I couldn't say. And the second I started, answering something that he wasn't expecting, then he would interrupt me and try and impose his answer on me.
Did Don have any idea about your background?
I don't think so. I think all he knew is this is a Trump official who happens to be Jewish. That's how he introduced me multiple times. A Trump Jew, a Trump Jew. Here's a Trump official who's going to criticize Trump, and he's also Jewish. So, this is a layup for him, I think, is what he expected.
Now, we've now talked for a grand total of 9 minutes. I don't know how long you were on the air with Don Lemon. How long were you on the air with him for?
It was 10 minutes of exactly the same question. Don had only one question prepared for me, and that's exactly what we talked about for 10 minutes, nothing else. And I'm frankly, I'm a little disappointed that the two co-hosts around him were completely silent during the entire interview. They just let kind of Don hammer me with the same question.
Now, Len, can I keep you for an extra segment? Because I want to get to what's going on in Iran. Okay, then we're going to come back and talk about Iran with Len, who's an expert on Iran. I see there's a crack in the regime this morning, and I want to talk to him about the real news. But if you were a CNN producer, did they call you after the show, by the way, to apologize?
No.
Oh, Don Lemon's producer used to call me after his show after he would go berate me, and I just stopped doing his show because he's never going to win the spelling bee, and he gets very insecure, and he starts rambling like that. But I used to get an apology that no one from CNN called you.
No one called me, but I tell you what, my daughter afterwards made me lemon bars, but they're called Don Lemon bars. So it made me feel better.
Well, Len, it was a disaster for the former president. And then he followed up with a second disaster. I just got done writing about how his playbook is when he makes a big mistake like this, the dinner, is to set a backfire controversy, which in this case was to repeal the Constitution, but that didn't work. It just became a giant inferno of bad news for Donald Trump. Do you agree with my assessment?
Yeah, I don't think we should be repealing the Constitution.
Yeah, you and I, we're agreed about that. When we come back, though, we're going to talk about Iran because Len's real strike zone is the mullahs, and the mullahs are buckling. They are backing up in real time. So it is serendipitous that Don Lemon insulted Len Khodorkovsky so that he would be here this morning on the day that a crack appears in the regime basis as they talk about getting rid of the morality police and the mandatory hijab. We'll talk about that. That's real news, and we'll do it in the right way professionally here on the Hugh Hewitt Show when we come back from break with Len Khodorkovsky. Stay tuned. Back, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I want to remind everyone we are raising money for Angel Tree, and $25 from you will make sure that a prisoner gets a gift and a Bible and a handwritten note sent to their child because of Angel Tree. The banner's over at hughhewitt.com. You see there on your screen my friend Len Khodorkovsky, who I've known for a long time now, maybe even 4 years. Len knows a lot about many things, but he knows a lot about Iran. Len, this morning, the Wall Street Journal has a headline: Iran disbands morality police, considers changing hijab laws, official says. Move is aimed at trying to quiet protests that have taken place across the country. Iran's attorney general said the country has disbanded its so-called morality police and is considering altering the requirement that women cover their heads in public. What do you make of that, Len Khodorkovsky?
Well, number one, what I get is desperation. The regime is obviously feeling the heat after almost 3 months of protests. But I think we need to be cautious about the story. First of all, the Attorney General has no purview over the morality police. It's part of the Interior Ministry. And things like this are baked into the Islamic Republic's constitution. So it has to go all the way up to the Guardian Council and Ayatollah Khamenei himself. So, perhaps it's a trial balloon. Is indicative of the reality that the regime is on the ropes. I don't think they expect 3 months worth of protests. Just to paint the picture, I mean, these protests started when a young woman, a 22-year-old young woman, was arrested by the so-called morality police because she wasn't wearing her hijab, modestly enough. So too much of her hair must have been showing. And she was arrested. She died in custody. And that, of course, sparked a wave of protests. But today, these are not protests strictly about women's rights or mandatory hijab. We tapped into something much deeper that have been percolating for many years. The regime itself has no legitimacy among the people. Even if we go back to the 2009 Green Revolution, Obama and Biden were silent and supporting the people. This has to do with innate corruption. It has to do with failed promises of the original Ayatollah Khamenei, who promised all sorts of things to people, and all of his promises have been broken. And, so people are sick and tired of being lied to, of not getting paid, of being tortured and killed, and have their lives dictated by a small group of people who don't represent their rich 2,500-year-old culture.
Now, Len, I mentioned in the first segment, you are by descent a Soviet Jew who emigrated to the United States because the KGB wanted your parents' apartment. So you know totalitarian regimes. You lived under one. And you can remember 1988, 89, and 90, like I can, and 91, when the Soviet Union dissolves. Also, China today announced they're rolling back COVID policy, I think because protests there. Totalitarian regimes are very, very rigid. And when little cracks appear, little spider cracks, they can spread. Do you think we're on the cusp of that in Iran?
I think we've been heading in this direction for a while. I do think the regime will crumble sooner rather than later. It's as I said, it's lost all legitimacy among a widespread of population. There are very few people who truly endorse the regime. If they're in favor of the regime, it's because they benefit from the regime. So they make money off of it. They somehow are left alone to some extent. But most average people, it's 83 million people, don't really support the regime, and they can't wait until they can go back and live in the tradition that Iran has been for the last 2 millennia.
When we
it's important for people to understand that the current regime in charge of Iran is a historic anomaly. This is not Iran's history.
we're going to come back with Len Khodorkovsky because we have a long segment after this, and I want people to understand what the JCPOA did, which was prop up the regime, how the regime suffered under Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo, and how now, because Biden has not been able to resurrect that JCPOA, all the chickens are coming home to roost in Iran, and we can pray for freedom there, and we'll talk about whether or not it's realistic with Len Khodorkovsky, Don Lemon's least favorite guest and one of my favorite guests, right after this on the Hugh Hewitt Show. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I'm so grateful to Don Lemon for berating my guest, Len Khodorkovsky, last week and absolutely being rude and unprofessional to him because it led to me reaching out to Len, and Len is here talking about Iran. We've covered the Don Lemon meltdown, the former president's dinner at Mar-a-Lago. Now we're focused on a major, major story that is happening right now. More than 300 people have been murdered by Iran's police. That's their official number. I don't know what the real number is over the course of 3 months. The regime, I think, is at a inflection point, and I wanted to ask Len, if Mike Pompeo were still at state and not Tony Blinken, and you were still there and not whoever is the new Len Khodorkovsky, and Keith Kroc was still there and not whoever the new Keith Kroc is, what should we be doing right now to assist the people of Iran to get their freedom, Len?
Well, first of all, we wouldn't have had the last 2 years of appeasement of the regime. As you noted, leading into this segment, what the Biden administration did is reversed, 3 to 4 years of maximum pressure on the regime, which deprived them of the resources to do what they're doing to the people right now. Now, just to put it in perspective, in January of 2021, when the Biden administration came into power, the Iranian regime had about $4 billion of cash reserves. Now, that is even smaller than Afghanistan at the time. So we pretty much had the regime on the ropes, and the same people who are out on the streets right now, were applauding the Trump policy. They love Trump. They love Mike Pompeo. They love what the Trump administration was doing to the regime to constrain its ability to terrorize them and to terrorize the state. So we wouldn't have had 2 years of the Biden administration looking the other way while the regime is allowed to sell its oil to China, while the regime is able to recoup its coffers. I mean, those $4 billion are probably 10 times that much because the Biden administration hasn't enforced the maximum pressure campaign. They'll tell you that they haven't changed the policy in that way, but they have. And the regime has benefited, and the regime has saw what was coming on election day when it was enriching uranium at 4.5%, and today it's enriching it at 60%. So that just tells you where things stand. It's emboldened, and it felt like it can do what it's doing. Now, who knows what if? But I think a few months of maximum pressure campaign, if it were continued, if these protests were happening under those circumstances, I can assure you the regime would be on the brink of collapse.
You see, so in the Trump years, maximum pressure on Iran and the people beginning to get a grip on the fact that the regime might be unstable. Arrives Biden, maximum pressure goes away, and the people go into their homes until they just can't take it anymore. They shoot. They murdered this young woman in prison because of hijab being worn the wrong way. And now, I know you follow this pretty closely, Len. How many different levels of how many people do you think have been murdered by the regime?
Well, certainly hundreds. It's very hard to tell because it's very hard to get real information. We know that in November of 2019, 1,500 people were massacred in the span of a week. So I assume. Oh yeah, that's absolutely true. Reuters reported on that. I expect that the casualties are higher than what we're hearing. And but the difference is what the regime thought would happen, just like it happened in 2019, is their brutality would suppress the demonstration. It hasn't. The brutality has not discouraged people from going out and burning posters of the Ayatollah and Soleimani and calling for the overthrow of the regime. I mean, the regime has been known to chant death to America, death to Israel for 43 years. The people on the street today are calling death to the dictator. That's how far we've come.
So Len, do you actually think we could see a replay of what is going on in Iran from the? Could we see them fall the way we saw the Soviet Union fall in rather dramatic fashion overnight?
It's hard to predict. I don't know. No, every dictatorship is different, and yes, it could happen that way. It could happen a different way. I can't really know how the Iranian people will, at some point, take their destiny back from the Ayatollahs. It could, because we were talking about these fissures. There are people inside the IRGC, which is the Revolutionary Guard Corps, which essentially reports to the Ayatollah, who have not been cooperative in suppressing dissent. There have been people in police who haven't been suppressing dissent. There are fissures that are growing. We're not hearing much about them here in the West, but even people, just to put it in perspective, IRGC is like the Gestapo of the Nazi regime. So their allegiance is not to Iran. Their allegiance is to Ayatollah Khamenei. And even there, you see people who refuse to suppress their neighbors and the average Iranian demonstrator. So
what I want to make sure people understand is that the regime there is a totalitarian regime. The facade that's been up there, we've known forever as a facade. The idea that there are liberals in Iran is nonsense. But there are deeply vested families, like the Rafsanjanis, et cetera, have been pushed to the side. But they have a lot of money. And I've been reading the Iran story. It looks to me like the other parts of the country, the people, the academics, the students, and the money may have had it with the Ayatollahs. Am I right about that, Len?
You're 100% right. And even within those families that you mentioned, Khamenei's own niece criticized the government just the other week, and I believe she was arrested for it. So you're seeing a lot more people in more and more prominent positions side with the protesters. And that's why you're seeing trial balloons like the latest one with his abandonment morality beliefs, which, I'll believe it when I see it. But, that's why you're seeing the regime is stealing the game.
Okay, last question, Len. When we see this happening and the hijab police being allegedly disbanded, I don't know what we're not seeing. Do we have eyes into the country? Israel certainly does. Israel can go in and find the files that they've got to steal from a warehouse. They know exactly what's going on in Iran. Do we know exactly what's going on in Iran? And do you think the Biden administration would have the courage to act on it?
We have a good idea of what's going on. We do have a way of getting the news other than through Iran's formal channels. So, yeah, we definitely have a good idea. The Biden administration definitely has access to the information that it needs to make serious decisions. There's no doubt about that.
Is President Biden and Secretary Blinken saying or doing the things that you would expect Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo to be doing right now?
Of course not. I think they've been timid. I think their statements have been timid. I think they're misreading the purpose of the protests. It's not just about women's rights. It's not just about negotiating some reforms with the regime. That time has come and gone. At this point, the people want the dictatorship gone. That's what it's about. And the Biden administration, I think, is still trying to, somewhere in the depths of their, instincts, trying to revive the JCPOA because they still are playing the old game, the old Obama game of old school diplomacy, quote unquote. But that time is gone. That opportunity is gone. We know the regime is not interested in any of that. The Ayatollah has spurned the Biden administration, and the only thing that the Biden administration and the Western allies and really any democracy should be doing is throwing out the Iranian regime officials out of their countries. We should be closing down their interest section in Washington, D.C. Oh, they have one. The Pakistani embassy allows them to have some sort of a diplomatic presence here. We should lock that down. We should throw them out of their UN offices. So there's a lot that we and others could be doing to put more pressure on the regime and make them feel like they are an illegitimate usurper of a real country.
Well, Len, I want to thank you again. I also want to thank Don Lemon for being inconceivably rude and dismissive of a guest who actually knows what they're talking about, because he inspired me. I have you on occasionally anyway, but I'm awfully glad that you're on this morning. So thanks to Don Lemon. I hope you get a second round of lemon bars. I don't know what kind of Hewitt cookies your daughter's going to make for you, but they should be sweet and sugary because I'm just that nice.
Thank you very much, Hugh. I appreciate you having me on as always.
Always a pleasure. Message from Len on Twitter. Message from Len on Twitter. He actually is a huge brain, and I just can't believe CNN botched that interview that badly. Thank you, Len. Be well. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Thank you so much for listening to the Hugh Hewitt Show. Last week, I was broadcasting from the American Legislative Exchange Council in Washington, D.C., talking with lots of state legislators who are opening the door up to school choice. And in places like Florida, West Virginia, and Arizona, school choice has been greatly expanded. The Arizona model is universal. Every single student has $6,000 to spend wherever they want. And I think that is going to spread to Iowa and Ohio very, very quickly, and after that, across the United States. The question is, where will the students fleeing failed public schools go? My friend Eric Twist in Phoenix said, you got to talk to Tom Carroll. He is the Boston Catholic School Superintendent, and they're doing amazing things up there, and that was music to my ears. So we got a hold of Tom Carroll, and he joins us. Good morning, Tom. Welcome. It's good to have you on.
Good morning. Nice to be on.
Tom, tell us, first of all, what your job is up there in Beantown.
Yeah, so I'm superintendent of Catholic schools in the Archdiocese of Boston. So we have 100 schools, 32,000 children, 3,000 teachers, 1,200 support staff. So it's a pretty large school system, largest school district geographically in Massachusetts.
Now, that 32,000 kids is a lot. Is that up or down over the last 10 years, and what do you expect is going to happen in the next 5 years?
Yeah, so the trajectory since 1965 across the entire country is a decline in Catholic education. But starting with COVID, when we made the decision to be open and the other side decided to kind of phone it in, so to speak, we've been going like gangbusters. So we've had really good enrollment the last 3 years. And so a lot of people have switched over. And then also, because some of the crazy stuff that's going on in public schools, we're also getting a lot of people switching to Catholic schools as a way to protect the innocence of their children and not get exposed to a lot of stuff that they don't want little kids exposed to.
I want to come back to that in a second, Tom. But first, in terms of the enrollment, it's great that it's up. I'm a product of Catholic education, grade 1 through 12, and it's still going strong in Warren, Ohio. Go Eagles. They lost the state championship this weekend, so we're a little bruised up, but we're still in the game. And Catholic education in Ohio is very, very strong. But did you sell off a lot of your schools when the bankruptcy occurred, or are those properties still there to be reopened? How are you absorbing new students?
Yeah, so we actually haven't gone bankrupt, but we've had initial, about 20 years ago, pretty tough financial challenges in the Archdiocese. But Cardinal O'Malley came in, essentially cleaned up the scandal that existed previous to 20 years ago, and we've been doing really well. It's tight all across the country. These are challenging times on the religious front because of the secularization of the broader culture. But I have a great sense of optimism. I think a lot of people are returning to religious education and private education more broadly. A lot of people are looking to put their kids in schools in which people want to partner with parents to help their children grow in virtue.
Yeah, grow in virtue is the point. I grew up on the Baltimore Catechism, and many people in this audience will know what that is. Now public schools are using a different kind of catechism. It's a woke catechism, and it is a completely inappropriate catechism, and it's driving parents crazy. And I think you're the beneficiary of that. How do you police? Look, Catholic school teachers are no different from public school teachers when it comes down to the classroom. They matter the most. How do you keep them from going off the reservation into ideology?
Yeah, so we've sent, since I've started here, I've been here about 3.5 years. there's been a big focus of mine is kind of return to our roots, which is number one, we don't do politics, we don't do ideology. Doesn't make a difference whether it's liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat. We're here to promote things that are more transcendent than that. So our primary goal is to draw children closer to God and to set them up on the path for eternal salvation. So if that's the goal, there isn't room for a lot of these political controversies. We're dealing in eternal truths that date back at least 2,000 years. We're not dealing in political squabbles of the day. And we also don't believe, we have a particular Catholic anthropology, how we view the world, how we view the human being, starting with God created man and woman. And so as a result, we look at things a particular way. So we have a policy, nobody is allowed to endorse candidates of either party. That applies to priests and applies to all employees. I think that's completely the right approach. My own case, because my job, I'm not registered with the political party one way or the other. And that's to set the tone that it's important to whatever people's political views are, they can leave those at home. But when you enter a classroom, our goal is to work on the eternal salvation of all the children in our custody. And we also, obviously, we create a sense of community. There's a sense of respect for parents in particular as the first educators of their children. And that often is being ignored in other school systems outside of Catholic education. But that's central to our existence. That's why when COVID hit, we never gave any thought to not reopening as soon as we were legally allowed to. And so for us, there was even no need to have a meeting or make a decision about it. All the parents wanted the kids back in school. All the teachers wanted the kids back in school. And we want to be open for business because faith formation is all about personal encounter. It's not about phoning it in and taking time off and doing everything through a computer. And so for us, it was core to our faith and core to the model of our schools that we needed to have the children in front of us and walk on a journey with us.
I think the first thing you said, Tom Carroll, is that it's about eternal salvation. Lesson first from the old catechism was the purpose we are for is to know, love, and serve God. If you begin every day with lesson first, that will, in fact, form the teacher's approach to their children, and they will then understand that. I'm curious. I spent Thursday night with the folks from Hillsdale who are opening charter schools or helping to open charter schools across the United States. They prohibit all electronics in their classical charter schools. They do not allow iPhones. They don't allow computers. I'm wondering what the Diocese of Boston thinks about this new world, which is trying to press in on every child's every minute.
Yeah, so that we haven't taken that position. I mean, people are not to be allowed to be trolling on their phones or their laptops in classrooms for sure. But we don't, for a variety of reasons, including school shooting incidents and other things. Parents are very anxious about their kids not having phones on them. So we allow children to have phones on them, but they're not allowed to be checking their emails and texting in the middle of class for sure. The other thing we're doing you talked about kind of the secularization of the broader culture, which has affected Catholicism as well, is I've been running around the country recruiting liberal arts majors come fresh out of college, specifically to find the most faithful kids and the brightest and most faithful, kind of a Catholic version of Teach for America. And so we've had a lot of success in terms of finding people that have the missionary zeal, looking for something meaningful to do as they come out of college, and also trying to, in many cases, repeat kind of the Catholic community that they've had in colleges. For example, like Thomas Aquinas College, we recruit a lot of teachers out of. And this is the first cohort of people in what I'm calling the St. Thomas More Teaching Fellows. And I'm finding just an unlimited supply of people who want to go to work in Catholic schools and who want to talk openly about their faith, which they cannot do if they work in a public school, and want to basically serve as a witness to Christ.
Tom, when I was growing up, every Catholic educator was making a sacrifice. I mean, by choosing a Catholic school over a public school, they were making a sacrifice in pay and benefits and pension. And Fred Hoover, if you're listening, and Ron Kauenbauer as Con Valord, and Kathy Santucci and the sister. I remember them all, but they were all making. Does the Boston school system try and stay competitive with public schools on salary and benefits?
Yeah, in a Massachusetts, particularly Boston area context, it's extremely difficult to match competitively the salaries. And so people who come to teach in our schools and stay in our schools are driven by a religious mission. and they're not driven totally by financial considerations. There's no doubt people can make a lot more money on a taxpayer-funded public school that has unlimited resources. That, depending on the school district, could be spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 per pupil. Because we're a tuition-driven system, we can't charge parents those kinds of levels, and obviously we don't have the taxing authority. But the consequence of that is the compensation is definitely more modest, and the rewards are more eternal and less financial. But we're trying to be competitive, particularly on leadership, and the people that I'm recruiting as teachers, because we have so many jobs and we have a potential for advancement. So somebody who comes in the entry level as a teacher could become a dean of students, a dean of academics, an assistant principal, and also they become, I've made people principals at a pretty young age. So we offer advancement up the food chain, if you will, that's much more rapid than you'd have in a structured, a much more regimented public unionized school system. We also don't require teacher certification.
What would or you don't require? That's good, because that means you can hire a platoon leader fresh from Afghanistan who led men into battle and not worry about whether or not they have a certificate from the state. But what about other schools? What would happen if it's not going to happen? But if Massachusetts adopted the Arizona model, where $6,000 followed every student wherever they went, what would happen to your school system?
Oh, we would. We have no lack of people who want to go to schools. Not everybody can afford. We have a limit on. We give out roughly $10 to $12 million in scholarships every year. So we do everything we can to make it accessible. But there's no doubt if we had a school choice, whether it was a voucher or a scholarship tax credit or education savings accounts, that the number of people that would switch over would be phenomenal. We'd have every single school building would be full to the max if we had an unlimited school choice program. So the Arizona model is great. I think the Florida model, which was put in under Jeb Bush, they created a tax credit to incentivize philanthropy. There's more than $1 billion in scholarships, more than 100,000 children that are being scholarshiped in Florida because of that program. So I think there's great potential. There's tremendous interest, and I think the more the public schools get more and more woke and more focused on things that do not have to do with education or character formation, the more they're unaligning themselves with what the parents are actually looking for. I've never met a parent who wants teachers talking to their kids about politics or sex in elementary school. It doesn't make a difference if you're a Democrat, a Republican, a libertarian, or a communist. It doesn't really matter. Parents want to protect the innocence of their children as long as humanly possible. And so I think a lot of this, I just think it's a huge mistake. I say that as a parent of two boys, but also somebody who talks to hundreds and hundreds of parents all the time. They just don't want any of it. And it doesn't make a difference how they vote in the voting booth. They just don't want their kids exposed to it. That's not why they send their kids to school.
Amen. And Cardinal O'Malley gets big stars for hiring you. Let me ask you one more thing, Tom. How do people find out about the St. Thomas More Fellowship if they want to come to Boston and teach in your program?
Yeah, they can just go on our website, which is csoboston.org, CSO for Catholic Schools Office, or they can email me directly, Thomas_Carroll, CARROLL, at rcab.org for Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find and pretty accessible. And the St. Thomas More Fellows program is also on social media. Yeah, we're looking to hire.
Call me when you need a speech and debate coach that can work like half-time, call me. I'll be happy to come up there and join your system. But Tom Carroll, you're doing great work, and I hope every Catholic school district in the United States is listening to you and following your model. Is there anyone else? We got like 10 seconds. Anyone else doing it the way you're doing it across the United States?
We're the only ones doing the scope of what we're doing right now, but I get calls from other superintendents. There's a lot of interest on replicating some of the approaches we're taking. But I think the big insight is it's all about talent. It's who you put on the field. And you have to understand what game you're playing. If you're playing a football game, you don't put a bunch of tennis players on the field. So we need to put on the field people that are committed to evangelization. And people can't give what they don't have. So we need to find faithful people who will be witnesses to stand in front of the children. In particular, we also need to double down on getting men in elementary classrooms so that they're male faith role models, which are largely missing in elementary education right now.
We're bringing you back to cover that last point because I missed the Santor in the 7th grade, and you're absolutely right. Tom Carroll, thank you from Boston. I'll be right back, America.